Hey, we're back again here at allpointstv.com. I'm George Moss, the host of the program called What's Going On. We come on at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Mondays, and we're glad you're here. And we hope you'll stay tuned for the next few minutes, and we're going to try to bring a quality program. If it comes across as less than that, then consider that one of our one of our off days. Okay, we're glad you're here, and we are doing our best. And I watch a lot of programs, and I can't understand why our numbers are not a lot higher than they are at some of these other programs that I watch. I don't know what they're doing over there, but we on all the networks, and when you add it all up, I guess it comes out to quite a few viewers. We're doing that for the viewers, and hope you enjoy what we're doing here at allpointstv.com. You know, we are doing programs right now. The next, let's see now, the next 3 weeks, I think 4 weeks, now think about it. The next 4 weeks, we'll be talking about things that were the grounding points of the country. We want to do a couple of things that have to do with how we got here. And I don't think you can get here to get where we are right now, get here by the things that we've been taught about the Constitution and things of that sort. So what I'm trying to do is go back and do something that will give us an understanding of how incrementally we've been moving in this direction for a long time. And if you will be here for the next, this is our second session where we are talking about the grounding points of the country. We're going to try to do a travelogue, historical travelogue, that will demonstrate how, first of all, we would demonstrate what the country intended, and then how we've arrived in 2024 at a very different place than what was really intended by the great framers of this country, who would be electrified negatively if they came back here to see what a mess we have made of what they carefully laid out and what they intend to do in terms of giving this country and their posterity a chance to have a quality of life that was unheard of in the world, rights that were never a part of the world, but they had looked at a lot of the things that had gone on in the past. They had determined that what they were going to do is to look at a lot of different things that had happened. Why did the republics, for example, go down and did not last long and went out, burned themselves out? And the idea was what had caused that. I was saying once before, Thomas Jefferson, for example, the great philosopher of the country that was given the keys to write the Declaration of Independence, being on the committee of 5 persons to do that, and Adams was the one that was really put at the head of the writing of it. But then he realized that there was a better person on that committee of 5 than himself, and he was, citizen statesman enough to recognize the talent on that committee, and saw that Thomas Jefferson was more endowed critically and in terms of textually than he was. Adams was a very smart man as well, but he was not the writer that and the theorist that Thomas Jefferson was, and so it was turned over to Thomas Jefferson to write the document, pretty much with input from others, but basically it is Thomas Jefferson's ideas, borrowed from a number of sources, Montesquieu and John Locke and some of the other thinkers of that time period. I see a lot of what's in that book, so what he wrote in the book that Thomas Jefferson translated out of the French into the English. Jefferson was a very was very literate in French language, and his translation of Constantine Volney's Volney's work, this great book called The Ruins of Empire, which I suggest the reading of that book, because that book shows you a number of empires that had come in to their own time period and were major empires during their time. And the question that Bonnet was raising in the book, which Jefferson translated and was aware of the polemics that were expressed in that publication, the question that Bonnet was raising, going to those ruins of those great empires, and was interrogating what happened to these empires, because they had stood at the very top of the pyramid of countries at that time, and to look at the grandeur, even in the ruins that they had left behind, was a testimony to how great the accomplishments were in those societies and those civilizations, those empires. And it raised the question of how did those great empires that were at the very peak of their at their time, how did they go out of? How did this happen? How did this collapse? These ruins take place. And if you read Volney's book, and I read it a number of times in the English, by the way, not in the French, because I took Spanish in college, and I never forget the Spanish teacher told me that he pitied, and he said it in these words: "I pity the Spaniard you talk to." And but that was my second language in writing. Pretty much was the Spanish, but these founders were, many of them, and I'm not going back to look at how many of those persons that were at that convention in 1787, how many of them would have been monolingual. And there was a time when this country was not a monolingual nation as it is right now. If you go outside the country and you say you're an American, they know that you speak English, and to the exclusion of all the other languages. And they put English speakers at the airports because they know that we'll do a lot of traveling, and they know that they must have someone at the airport that speaks English, because most of the people in the world are multilingual. It's amazing to travel and see that. But
to our defense, though,
I'm sorry.
To our defense, the United States, citizens' defense. Look how huge our country is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Europeans are like next door to each other. Like we can drive for 45 minutes an hour and just go from like what? Say you and I would go in, say jump in the car, go to Ann Arbor. That's an hour drive.
Mm-hmm.
In Europe, that possibly be another country with that distance. That's how close by they are.
Yeah.
So there's a real need for us to learn a lot of languages. There really wasn't.
Yeah. Some of it is the proximity that you have to other linguistic groups, and that's a great part of it. Another part of it is that, and I found this out in my own self in my own outlook when I went to Egypt in 1984 for the first time. Part of it also is a dismissal and an arrogance in the cultural outlook of the people in this country that think that the world should, in fact, imitate that which is here, and a non-appreciation to some extent of how things go in other parts of the world. I think a lot of it is dismissal. I mean, you are close to other countries in Europe, but we're not that far. We are very close to Mexico, and the language in Mexico is Spanish, but you won't find a lot of persons necessarily, speaking that. I mean, when they have some boxing on TV, for example, they have to translate it to everybody in the country practically, not only ones in the northern part, but those that are around, those in Texas and states around Arizona. You know, I've been to Arizona. They say that I was born there. I've been in those southern states, and there is a linguistic distancing from Spanish in places where they have large Spanish populations, but those that are not Spaniards in not from Spanish speaking areas of in Latin America, you can find many Latin Americans there, and they're speaking, and they are like over here, um, speaking in an accent. You could tell that the English was not their first language, because if you don't, if any language you learn away from your own mother's knee, there's an accent attached to the language because it's not your mother's language. But you can find a linguistic distancing taking place in the southern part of the United States. I've seen that in Las Vegas, and some other places where there is a large Spanish population. But apart from that, there's another population that does not engage the language. And if you're not speaking English in those places, many of them, then you're not going to be coherent. But yeah, some of it is the proximity where but it's a certain cultural respect as well. You know, so I don't want to get off on that, but that a lot of it is the proximity, but some of it is that what the proximity teaches you. It teaches you a respect for the culture, just because you can experience them and you can see into what those cultures are. It gives you a certain cultural respect for the difference. I don't think we have so much of that. I'm when I saw it myself in '84. I thought about it, thought like they think here, and I was doing a lot of things culturally wrong and being corrected where I went in Egypt, and that was a baptism for me. And I came back and began to think about the experience I'd had, and I said to myself, "Why was I making all these mistakes?" Well, I give an example of it with President Nixon, who I think was a what would I say? What I say is I wouldn't say I don't say any of them are great presidents, but he was a competent. We're talking in terms of competency now. He was a competent president, and I remember when he went to China in I think it was '72. He went to China, and what the Chinese do is that they want to show that they are being hospitable by taking some of the food off their plate and with their what do you call those things? Those things they use the because they don't use spoons and things like that. So they took some of those chopsticks and took some of the food off uh, the plate. This is the president taking some of the food off the plate over in China. The president of China taking some food off his plate and putting it on Nixon's plate. So Nixon thought then that to be polite and kind was to then take some food off his plate and put it on his plate and put it on his plate, which is an insult because it's like he's refusing what was given to him and giving it back. And you make those kind of mistakes. I made a lot of mistakes when the first 3 or 4 days I was in Egypt, and I was not trying to be disrespectful, but I kept hearing everywhere I went. Anyway, in Vonet's book, he talks about those runs, and if you read the book carefully, and I only picked this up when I read it the second time, and that was when it took me a couple of readings. The second time I finally got it, because one of the things that Vonet does is that he has a discussion going with the person he identifies as the genius. And it says, "Oh, genius," and I didn't understand that phantom person in his writing until I read it a second time, and I saw what he was really doing there. He was doing his alter ego, and he was asking himself, he was saying, "Oh, genius, what do these runs, teach?" And I had the experience in Egypt, as a matter of fact, because when I went into those temples, I was asking myself, and to think deeply. That's what you're doing. You're asking you to think more deeply about what this represents, what this meant during the time when this grandeur was extant in the world, and this civilization had not gone the way of the world and no longer existed. But these ruins testified to their greatness. And so, what do those ruins mean about the civilization during that time period? And what happened here? That this greatness that you see, evidence of the relics of it, how did it come down to what it is right now? The reason why I bring that in is to show you that the people that were the founders of this country, the ones that had come behind the things that had been put in place, because now that they're fighting, you see, now this country is being birthed into existence. They are fighting a war, but in the midst of that war, they got to come up with something that will, in fact, be the governing province of the new nation they're creating. You can declare an independence, but at some point in time, you got to think about what are you going to put into place of that which was governing the country before the Declaration of Independence was, in fact, declared. And then now you're fighting the war for it. So in 17 so that in 17 I'm going to say 1775, quite frankly. In 1775, there is a certain amount of thinking about what if. We have not started the fighting yet, but it was very clear where this country was going with what was taking place. The Boston Tea Party, things of that sort. The so-called Boston Massacre on March the 5th, 1770. You see this tumbling of events going out of control, and where is this leading? And then the shooting back and forth, scrimmages that were taking place. One of which was like in the Boston Massacre. One of which was that the defenders of the British in that shooting incident, in which 5 persons died on March the 5th, 1770. John Adams defended the British soldiers in that event. But be that as it may, out every once in a while, the fact that those redcoats were on the land and were a reminder that this was untenable, because the persons that put them there were not their people inside those 13 states, colonies at this time, but these 13 states. And the question was, why were they there? And also, who put them there and for what reason? Since they had no voice in it, their thinking was then that it is King George III. And in the document that they will eventually come up with and write with through the pen of Thomas Jefferson, you'll see in the complaints that Jefferson listed, and there are 27 different complaints in the Declaration of Independence, you'll see what Thomas Jefferson was writing. He has done this, he's done the other thing, he's done such and such, because the focus is on King George III. And you'll see then that when that fight, which you could see it coming, I'm sure that this is what Thomas Paine was writing about when he said, "These are the times to try me in soul." We're not fighting yet, but you could see that these were times where the people were seeing where this is leading. It's just like you can see a lot of things going on right now. You can see where we're heading in this country right now. We're not heading in a good direction. And if this train that we're on right now is not stopped or reversed at some point in the immediate future, then the liberties that were once at least pretended to be in place in this country those liberties will be lost because we on that trail right now, down a different road than what was intended, and it is very fractious what's taking place in the country right now, and the tyrannical things that we see happening and can predict if it's not stopped. You know, Ayn Rand saw this in 1957 in Alice Shrugged. This can be seen even if you don't have a ground important history. You can see that this is not going in the direction that it needs to go in order to maintain and protect the freedoms this country has written down on this papyrus. The intention of the country and the framers is to do something that would maintain freedom for themselves and for the posterity. And that's not the track we're on right now. We are on a very different track. Well, they were aware that there were empires that had come into existence, they'd gone out of existence, and they were trying to look into what caused those civilizations to flicker, and in the flames that were burning at a high rate because of the greatness of the civilizations, what occurred that blocked that. And Jefferson, in writing and translating the book by Volney, would have been aware of the conversation that Volney was having at those ruins of empires, as Volney is standing there interrogating himself and asking the genius, his inner, consciousness, his mind, his inner thinking. As you talk to yourself, you're having a conversation with your inner mind to listen to it, because a lot of things that are happening on the subconscious level that you can think deeply about and bring up some thoughts that will appear to be a revelation. But what it really is that it's an inner understanding that you have to go deep within your own consciousness to bring that out. And he is saying in that book, "Oh genius, what happened here?" And it's going to different sites and so on. Jefferson was aware of that. And some of the other writers, some of these were the thinkers that were at that convention. And also in the writing of that Declaration of Independence, these are not just lightweight people. These are some of the heavyweights that were in the country at that time. And they were people that had been selected because of their demonstrated prowess intellectually over time in those places where they were from. So that the people, we're not talking about the kind of population we have right now. We're talking about a very small population. So people would know who are the intellects, who are the thinkers, who are the ones writing at this time, because there's not a lot of people that are literate in that sense. But so who are they? And so the ones that are going to these different meetings and doing this writing and publishing and so on and so forth, they're pretty much known throughout the community. And Thomas Paine, well known, and writers like John Locke. These people are these are people. These are theorists that they would have been aware of, and their writings would have been aware of. We're living in a country that's less literate in many ways now of our leadership than it was then. These were thinkers. These were literate people that were setting these things in stone, so to speak. They're coming. Then they have also. I think another thing that you have to point out about them, and that is that they were people who had a learning curve that was very admirable. To make a mistake and then to look it over to see what the mistake was. And they made a lot of mistakes on the way to the Constitution, for example. They in the fighting of this war, you are coming to understanding that you have to create a document that governs the country. And though at war, you're not going to be at war forever. So what are you putting in place to take the place of that which governed the country prior to the Declaration of Independence? And so when the independence was declared in 76, in 77, it behooves the country to start thinking about something that would govern the country in the absence of King George III, whom they were complaining about in the Declaration. I mean, the severance of that break is very clear at this point. So in 77, they have assigned the idea of creating something that will take the place of the governing documents that they had been under the people in Britain. And they had thought it would take 3 months for them to get enough states to ratify the document. And it would have taken, given the fact that they were all independent countries, quite frankly, at this point, it would have taken the ratification of all of them to, or let's say it would take 2/3 of them to endorse the Articles of Confederation. And that would be, let's see, 2/3 of that would be 9. And so 2/3 would have to ratify what was the Articles of Confederation, which they thought would be within about 3 months. They thought it would be a 3-month period of time. And what it ended up being was that it was more than 3 months. It was from 1777 to 1781, and it was not 2/3 endorsement by each state being independent, each state being a country, because they're very different. They had to then get each buy-in into the declared governing document. And so the 2/3 that it took to bring that about, that becomes very problematical, because you have different regional interests and you have different economic interests that were at play, and you see it in the document itself. Every state being pretty much jealous of its own fiefdom and does not want to come under the umbrella of any of the other state. You can see that in the document, because what they were saying there was that in order to amend the document, because they're all independent states, every state that agreed to be a part of the Confederation has to, in fact, endorse any changes made in what they agreed to in the forming the Confederation in the first place. So now we're talking about 13 states, and each one having to unanimously agree to anything that will amend the document that they had. That's a very big problem. And you can think about that in terms of what would it be if you said today that you want to change the Second Amendment, which they want to change, and put something else in its place, but they're not able to do that. And they certainly wouldn't be able to do it if they had every state having to buy into that change. That's a tremendous.
Back off your microphone.
That would be a tremendous change to make.
Back away from your microphone a bit, okay?
Oh,
You're leaning more into it, yeah.
Okay, leaning more into the mic. Yeah. So that would be a big problem if you had all 50 states. The equivalent today would be all 50 states to all 13 states having to agree with any amendments added to the document. You would never have had any amendments to the Constitution that we have right now, and that would be an impossibility. They want to take away the Second Amendment, but it would take an amendment to do that, and the amendment has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states, and that would be that's difficult enough. And that was the intention of the frame, was not to have that, so that 2/3 recommendation to change it, and then 3/4 to actually ratify the recommended change. That's a very difficult proposition, meant to be that way. And you can see that the Constitution only been amended 18 times. I mean, 10 amendments at one time, and then 17 amendments thereafter. So it's very difficult to do that. But in the articles, because, and I can understand the framers in this sense too. I can understand that they are fighting against what they looked at as the oppression of King George III, and they are bringing that view into their trying to come up with something that would govern the country now, with the particulars in mind of what it was that we're fighting against. And they were fighting against the taxation issue, among other things. They were fighting against not a centralized power, and that was a concern they had. And you see that in the articles, because the articles only had one branch of government, and that was the legislative branch. Did not have a judicial branch, and it did not have an executive branch. So then it didn't have any executive enforcement, and it didn't have any interpretive body. So that was those are weaknesses. But you see the learning curve, the stimulus for having the convention to get away from the articles, which is what really happened at the convention in Philadelphia. That was not intended, but they went there to amend the articles, which were too prohibitive. I think there's a tremendous amount of paranoia in the country because of the tyranny they felt they were fighting against, and were fighting to come from under. And to have that a government set up, you have to think about how you're going to parlay the power in the country so that it's not concentrated and centralized as it was under the King George III, so that they would have a voice in how they are to be governed. The consent of the governed is what they're thinking about. They didn't have any consent prior to, and were determined not to have to face that again and the aftermath of what they were fighting against. So now they have to come together again to ferret out how to get past what they had done at the formative state, because the articles were the first. Some say that the Articles of Confederation was this country's first constitution, and you could make an argument against that. That it was a constitution, and one professor, I was listening to him a couple of weeks ago. One professor, I didn't have any professor that felt this way in my training, but there's one professor who said that the articles were a success, and I know what he's getting at. I wouldn't qualify that way, but I do know what he's saying. He's saying that you had to go through these birth pains so as to come to an understanding where the mistakes were and what needed to be ironed out, so he could get it down to a science later on. And if without having the articles as a stepping stone, maybe you would not have had the things that came out of the convention in 1787. I do understand how you have to go through a number of steps and procedures and make a lot of errors, and because it's a learning curve. And so they made some mistakes out of what I consider to be a certain amount of paranoia, because you have to understand that they do not want to recreate that which they had fought against. They did not want to have a King George III, and they did that by going too far to the point of I would say go too far to the left, where it was the idea of just having almost no government, which that's one way to do it, but where you land in that would be a certain amount of anarchy, and that was shown to them in 1786 by the Daniel Shays rebellion that took place in Massachusetts, because what was happening in America at that time was that those farmers who had fought in the Revolutionary War, they were now losing their farms because they could not pay the taxes. And if you couldn't pay the taxes, you lost the farms, and your livelihood was lost. And those farmers in Massachusetts rose up against the government because of that. And there was no way in order to bring the other states into a point of securing the government in that state. And they realize now that this islanding that had happened in the creation of the country, each state being his own country, so to speak, they then begin to realize that although the intention was understandable, that doesn't work. You have to have some umbrella through which the country can be secured, both domestically and internationally. Now, the articles were created because it is clear that countries deal with governing institutions. And if you don't have any structure in place through which the countries can deal with the 13 colonists, if they all are speaking from 13 different sources, then that creates a problem, because what would be the policy if each policy is different in each of the polities that are demanding their own space in it? So they have to have some kind of camaraderie, because now you're dealing as a country. Although in that dispensation, they are really 13 countries at this point. But they have to figure out how to deal with the international landscape, and that would be to do so by coming together and so on. But they want to maintain at the same time, they want to maintain their independence, even though they're coming together as a confederation of independent countries. That's how they saw it. Now, this one professor was making an argument, which I can definitely understand his argument. He is saying that was a success because of what it led to. So in that sense, it's successful because it is a stepping stone to something better. What they would do later on, though, as you know, because you now know it from what we have in this country today, if it were carried out, it would be a plan that could still work very well if it was in fact employed, but it's not employed because they've overthrown the document, so to speak. But if it were to be employed as intended, you would have the great nation that was intended by the framers. They intended this country to be great, and they started out with a great resolve to make the country great by standing back themselves from being too loquacious in their use of power. They were very much about the business of government and governing well. And if you look at the first, I would say from the articles were ratified in 1781. They thought it would take three months to bring the ratification about, but there were a lot of problems on the way. And one of the problems was some of those states had territories beyond their boundaries, and some states were feeling that they could be overwhelmed by Virginia and some of those other states, and they would be overwhelmed by the number of persons that they would have control over, and look at these small states, and these small states would not have the numbers to do pushback. So that was a concern. And so some of that is there are different polities and you're trying to bring them together in a unified country with all these different interests and so on. And that the learning curve, I guess the point it would be, the learning curve is that, okay, they learn that is not the best. Procedurally, it doesn't work. On paper, you can understand the idea, limited power. But the question now is, it doesn't work in that way. And how do you then, the idea itself is not bad. It's a great idea to limit power. You have to limit power. But how do you do that in a way in which has not been done? The idea, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. The idea is great, but how do you achieve that? By just simply not letting government do anything, because government obviously has to operate. It has to operate through taxation. It has to operate by having a armed force to resist invasion. It has to have a voice in which there's a commonality in terms of how the voice speaks for the Confederation and so on and so forth. So how do you achieve that? And they're pushed to it. I think that what really pushes them to finally get to the point that this has got to be changed, I think the Shays Rebellion is that catalyst, because when that rebellion occurred, all the states watching this play out saw that the same thing could happen with the same grievances where they were. It could happen where they were as well. And they saw that all of them were, in fact, vulnerable in the same way that Massachusetts was vulnerable. It could happen there too. And now they are saying that there's an interest that they have in having a convention to fix the problem. They had an idea of having to fix the problem before, but nobody would show up for it. But now, after 1786, they are now saying that it is in their interests, all of their interests, to do something about this problem. Because now Shays Rebellion has shown that the vulnerabilities that are there in Massachusetts right now could spread throughout the 13 states, colonies, and all of them needed an umbrella protection. So now that they were talking about a convention, now they're talking about sending representatives there, where they talked about it before, had representatives going before, and none of the states, not enough states showed up. 7 states showed up, 5 states showed up. They couldn't have the common agreement that they needed. What they did, and this is something about to do about the greatness of our greatest president, our only great president, in my own estimation of it, George Washington, is that the way they got him at the convention, and this has not been said before, the way they got him at the convention after 1786, because they now are realizing that this is extremely important. What they did was to Hamilton went to George Washington, and so did Madison. Went to George Washington and asked Washington to put his name out there that he's going to attend. He's not a delegate. He's not one of the delegates chosen to go to the convention, but they told Washington they needed his name, and if you don't go and if you don't come, your name is such that the people want to see you. They want to feel that you are part of this apparatus that whatever we create, that you're a part of it. And they had so much faith in George Washington that they want him to just say he would be there, whether he would come or not. And Washington agreed to do that, and he did show up for it. And when he showed up, they of course made him the president of what they're getting ready to create. George Washington is the president of the delegation. In other words, he's the one they put over the deliberations. He was not an official member, but given the persona of George Washington, that's why I have to tell you, he stands up and stands out from all the rest of the presidents we've had. You cannot. There's not another president we've had. Let's put it this way: there's not another president we've had that could have done what George Washington did, which was to be the glue, the binding, the mortar that glues the nation together, because it's so fragmented. It takes a very strong, respected personality to have been there at the very beginning. None of the others that have come after George Washington could have done that, not from what I see them doing in the aftermath of George Washington's presidency. Maybe the closest to it would have been, and I'm not sure he's all that close, but I think that maybe the closest to it would have been James Monroe, the fifth president. And even in that, it would not have been that close, because Monroe was a fitting president. He had been at the convention, so he was also very respectful of what it was that they had done at that convention, and was very respectful of it, and respecting for the use of power in a responsible way. That he is probably the closest to Washington. I don't even think Madison. I even think Madison was the father of the Constitution. But I don't think when you go back and read these biographies of these presidents, I don't think Madison was as true to the ideals that he had, even written about in the Federalist Paper. He wrote 29 of the Federalist Papers. I don't think you could say that Madison was as true to the ideals that he had written about, although he's a major writer, because he wrote 29 of the 85 Federalist Papers, Hamilton writing 51, and John Jay writing 5. But I think that when you read, there's a very good book out on Madison, written by one of the Cheneys. I'm not sure what the relationship is to Liz Cheney, but it's that family. One of the person in that family is a historian that wrote a very good book on James Madison. I forget the first name now of the writer, but the book was excellent. And I get the impression that Madison was kind of going back on some of the very things he laid down. For example, you'll see later on in the Jays Treaty, Madison will claim that the treaty needed to be ratified by both the House and the Senate. Now, the Senate ratifies treaties today, right? You're aware of that, and that's what the Constitution called for. That's what's in the document. But later on, Madison's going to claim, because he's in the House representative at this point, Madison's going to claim that both the Senate and the House need to ratify treaties. And George Washington goes back into the notes and pulls the notes out and brings the notes that were taken. Who's the person that did the note taking there? But pull the notes out. Yates is one of them, but there's another person that is taking notes there. I can't think of his name right now, but he's the major one taking notes. Of course, Madison had notes also. And he takes Madison's words out and says, okay, here's what you said at the convention. Anyway, you can see that we're now on the way to creating something, I would say, different, but something better as well, that comes out of the experience they had with the articles. And they're now getting ready to create something the world had never seen before. And out of that will come the Constitution of the United States. And that would be the document that has become, over time, that which is admired by the people all over the world. They realize that takes great men, great people, great men, great women, only men at the convention here, though. It takes greatness to create that document, and it was created out of scratch. And rather than doing that, what they've decided to do in a lot of countries is to simply take the document and the birth pains that it caused, to learn how to use that within their own formation of their documents, and just take from it the ideals, major ideals, separation of the powers, different bodies having different assignments and what they do in terms of the government, and do it so that each has a specific role to play in the government, but comprehensively, they're all working together. Now, I would say this before I get off the air. When I was in South Africa, I looked for that. I wanted to see just what had the Rainbow Coalition, they call it the Rainbow Constitution. I wanted to see what was in that Rainbow Constitution that was set up in South Africa in 1994. I wanted to see, given the fact that it was now being created newly, given the new set of circumstances in South Africa, I wanted to see just what parts of the document here they had there. And the Rainbow Constitution, like so many others, is almost like a complete borrowing from this document. And so that which was created out of the articles and now was the governing document of the country based upon that and the experience it had with the articles, that experience is being reverberated around the world in other parts of the world, because they understand that to do that, it takes a certain amount of genius to do it. And it is very difficult to do. They decided to do what? To copy. And that's the admirable thing that has to be understood here, to appreciate what is happening back here in this time period. Okay, I have to get off the air at this point. We'll be back next week. I wanted to go into what they came up with after they got rid of the Articles of Confederation, and we'll talk about that next week. Until next week, I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.